effectively.
I mean, the story of the right is that the left is an obstacle to liberty, period. The left is an obstacle to freedom. The left is an obstacle to a better life for everyone. The left is an obstacle to opportunity. The left is standing in between you and the future that you get to create for yourself. What's really ironic about all of this is that what has happened in Hollywood is the left actually, we're saying that we want to hijack the methods of the left. The truth is that the left hijacked the ideology of the right, meaning the left, they're a bunch of moral relativists. They don't believe in the concepts of good and evil, except when they're telling stories. When they're telling stories, suddenly it becomes there is a good and there is an evil. And so they've hijacked kind of the moral tropes of the right and they've leveraged them into the properties of the left. And that's what's so effective about it, because if they told a morally relativistic story all in shades of gray, it would be entertaining, but it wouldn't have the same moral impact, right? This is why Breaking Bad, I think, which is a story about shades of gray, is not something that has a tremendous leftist impact, whereas Avatar, which is a story about black and white, has tremendous moral impact for the people who are watching it. And I think that the right, for some reason, has been intimidated by all of this. There are folks on the right who are just scared of talking in terms of the left is evil. And the left is evil. What they are trying to do is evil. What they are trying to do by quashing American freedoms, what they're trying to do by destroying our values, is an evil thing. And that means that we have to fight it. But you see too many folks on the right, and I really believe that Ronald Reagan was wrong about this. I mean, when Reagan said that the folks on the left, it's not really that they're bad, it's just that they're ignorant. At a certain point, ignorance becomes sin. And if we refuse to make that point, if we refuse to go out and make that moral case, both in politics and in art, then we're going to continue to fall behind. And I also agree to a certain extent with what Andrew is saying, although not fully, with regard to kind of the content of movies. The things we want to see are very often stories of sin. But as long as we start with the right premises, you can show the sin, and then you can show the consequences of the sin. Right? That's actually how it worked during the years in the Hays Code, when a voluntarily adopted code brought about by pressure from the Catholic Legion of Decency, and it said that if somebody committed a crime, they had to be punished at the end of the movie. Well, if the crime gets punished at the end of the movie, that's a far cry from The Godfather, where the criminals are actually the heroes. So you can actually tackle the same material the left is doing, but from a different moral viewpoint and from a more satisfying moral viewpoint. So to sum up, as far as the morality that's being drawn, this isn't about us hijacking the methodology of the left. This is about us taking back a methodology that was originally ours from a bunch of people who have bullied us into silence and tried to stop us from using our own methodology by saying that we're nasty and coarse and vile if we say things like good and evil, whereas they are allowed to say good and evil as often as humanly possible.
Drew, I think that, like a presidential debate, you should be able to respond to what Ben just said. I do think it raises the question, if we don't want to be in the business of making morality plays, how do you use art to tell the stories that we need to tell?
The story of all Western art, all great Western art, is that the individual human experience of life has value. That's the story of all Western art. I mean, if I could sum it up in one word, Shakespeare almost invented this idea, but he invented it out of this great tradition that had come up to him through the classics and through the world that he experienced during the Reformation. The individual human experience of life has intense value. Picture a story that takes place during the Civil War, and somebody in the North, a child, comes to his father and says, you know, is slavery, is it bad that they're holding black people slaves down south? And the father says, well, that's just their culture, you know. I mean, we have a culture that, you know, respects, feels that everybody should be free no matter what color. It's their culture. That's what the left is saying about Islam right now, all right? It makes no sense, but they can make movies about it because they make movies in which individuals, good and bad, are respected and have a value. The days of the Hays office are gone. They are not coming back. Those movies were great. They're not going to be made, and if they were made, they wouldn't be relevant today. See, this is the thing. The world of sex has changed. It changed. It's not the same as it was. Certain moral aspects of sex will be the same forever, and we can make that case, but you cannot portray the world as it was portrayed in the 50s in the hopes that the 50s will come back. Remember this, the people who really ripped this culture to shreds in the 60s, and by the way, the Redford book you're talking about, the Redford movie you're talking about was based on a novel by a guy who used to be a very good friend of mine, a very, very far left guy who just thought he said to me once, we all deserve to die. That's what he said to me. We all, meaning the West, not meaning the Islamic East, but meaning the West. We all deserve to die. That was his belief. And one day, out of nowhere, he just wrote me a letter telling me that he was not my friend anymore, and he just simply couldn't know me anymore, which I would never have done to him. So these guys But these guys understand that the individual experience has all this power. We don't have to show people being punished for crimes. If we show people what honestly happens to people who commit crimes. What honestly happens to people who commit crimes is beautifully portrayed in Macbeth. The fact that Macbeth dies at the end is not the point. It's that he loses everything that he is. He loses all meaning. He makes one of the greatest nihilistic speeches in the history of art, where he says, you know, life is a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing, right? That's what he says. Because he committed evil and he destroyed his inner world. He destroyed his inner world through evil. If we're honest about the individual human experience, the morality will tell itself, for the simple reason that we live in a moral universe.
Yeah. Ron, you brought up Blue Bloods, and I think that Blue Bloods is probably, as Drew said, the kind of art that he doesn't think we should make.
No, I think that's good for the base. It's
good for the base. So there is room for the choir.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, CBS, any good television show that's made seems to be made on CBS, and they're also the most watched shows on television. Blue Bloods has tremendous ratings. CSI New York had tremendous ratings. More people probably watch an episode of CSI New York than watch the entire Thursday night lineup of comedies on NBC, but it's the comedies on NBC that shape the culture. If you ask the average American today who's more famous, Gary Sinise or Steve Carell or
Amy
Poehler, obviously they're going to say Amy Poehler, they're going to say Steve Carell, even though far more people engage the content that's on CBS. How do we take the huge numbers of people that actually do engage with our value system and help move toward a younger audience, move toward a more relevant cultural penetration with those stories?
I don't know if I can answer that, but I have one question. As Lee gave a wonderful speech with an incredible suggestion of our own NPR. It's a brilliant suggestion. Possibly too ambitious to pull off at the beginning, but why, let me put it down a level, why don't we even have a center-right daily show? We've read 1,000,000 times that most kids under 30 get their news from Jon Stewart. Nobody watches the network news except people over 60 or 65. Dwindling numbers. This isn't the 70s when Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. As it turns out, we know from his biography, he was really a leftist all the time. And nobody knew it. He wasn't the great objective reporter that everyone thought he was when they watched him with that wonderful tone, the voice of authority. But we don't have a center-right daily show. Now, to Jon Stewart's credit, I mean, I haven't seen the new movie he made last summer, but that's probably going to be, and I don't know how well it will fare, a movie that alerts more people than anything else to what the real evil nature of the regime in Iran. Jon Stewart's movie is about a British Iranian-born reporter who went back to Iran, was arrested, probably thought he'd die in prison, where he was brutally tortured, and because of international protests got out, and he filmed his story. That's going to be, because it's Jon Stewart who wrote and directed it from the guy's memoir, is going to be the movie that most alerts people. They didn't watch The Stoning of Soraya M., who's written by one of our people. Yep. Limited response. But this movie is going to be a great aid to realizing the danger of Iran getting the bomb. But look at the Daily Show's ratings. Also, to his credit, even he had to do an incredible sequence about Obama lying about lying. And when Obama's ratings plummet, even he, and evidently Jon Stewart saw Roger Ailes, stopped in his office and told him that he considers himself a socialist. But even Jon Stewart goes after Obama sometime. And when he, as they say, the famous Cronkite quote, if you lose Jon Stewart, you're losing America. We need a version of that kind of satire he does that just doesn't criticize Obama for putting up a bad website, but goes to the fundamentals. Yeah. We don't have that now.
But to the point of distribution, and Andrew will bear this out, and I know so many on the right, I can't tell you how many people want to just come on my talk shows. and beg so they can have some distribution just to talk to the choir. This is a matter of distribution, and what we always end up doing is begging. So say I created my alternative to the Jon Stewart show. How would I get it out? You think the Comedy Channel is going to take... I have an idea for something right now. We put Al Gore, we dress him in a Batman suit, okay? And he's the environmentalist hero that everyone hates because he's always telling people what to do. And he'd be saving the earth from truth and injustice, but only within 35 miles because that's as far as his little electric car goes. We could ridicule the left all day, and America would love it, but they're not giving us distribution. And when are we going to stop begging for people to tell us that we're allowed to see what we want to do? If we owned a distribution channel, we could put it on ourselves. It's that simple. I don't want to beg. I'm sick of begging. I'm Lebanese. We don't beg.
And you know what drives me crazy, too, is when Jon Stewart attacks Barack Obama, the right goes crazy. We say, oh, this is wonderful. He attacks Barack Obama. You listen carefully to every single time he's done it. The right, the Republicans, are always the evil guys. What Ben was saying, where he was saying the left are the enemies of freedom, that's literally true. But what every liberal knows is that we're the bad guys. And so, sure, they argue among themselves, they ridicule each other, they'll criticize each other, but we are always the bad guys. And so it doesn't help that Jon Stewart criticizes Obama. We need our own Jon Stewart.
And getting to Andrew's point, because this is one of the most interesting interviews Laura and I ever did. When we first signed National, we went to Westwood One, which was owned by Viacom, which is CBS. And so every Friday we went to Black Rock, because I wanted to get near Don Hewitt, and I wanted to come on our show. And I wanted to come on twice. The first time I wanted to come on for an hour, and I wanted to have a nice time. And the second time I wanted to challenge him that he has bias in his shows, and he was going to say to us, oh, that's ridiculous, we're not biased. And the beauty of how the left handles their depiction of us is they don't call us evil. They never use the word. It's the stock characters in their plays. And so we went back, I had my producers poll every single segment 60 Minutes did in the last 5 years. Mr. Hewitt came back to our show, and he said, so what about that bias? I said, well, okay, here we go. You did a whole bunch of exposés on bad corporate America. How many exposés on bad government? And by the way, Mr. Hewitt, do you think that corporate America, on balance, is more evil or more prone to corruption, or government? Do you think that our ecosystem of corporate competition ferrets out corruption by its nature, as opposed to government, which doesn't have competition? Long crickets. It was overwhelmingly plaintiffs' lawyers being celebrated and unions being celebrated. Rarely did he celebrate free enterprise. And so that's how Don Hewitt used 60 Minutes. A nice little segment about the opera, a nice little segment about this, and then boom, the whammo right in here in the middle segment on unions and how they're saving the day in against X, Y, and Z, big bad Walmart. 4 times they went after Walmart in 2 years. 4 times.
And that's what BuzzFeed is doing today. You know, five girls in bikinis, 5 reasons why Kim Kardashian's shoes are great, 5 reasons why Republicans stink. And that's they do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it's the SHIT sandwich, I call it.
Yeah. Lee, when you talk about distribution, one of the problems in the movie industry is that to distribute a movie in a mainstream way in America costs $30 million. And it doesn't matter if the movie costs $1 million or $100 million, the cost to get it out on 3,000 screens is $30 million. That leaves you in a position where you have to ask the question, how many $1 million movies, I left out a step, to recoup your money on a movie, the theaters keep 50 cents on every dollar. So just to keep the math super simple, a movie that costs $1 million plus $30 million of marketing has to make $62 million to break even. That forces you to ask the question, how many $1 million movies make $62 million? Very few. How many $100 million, on the other hand, make $500 million? The answer is very many. That's why we see Hollywood moving almost entirely to the big tentpole $100 million movie. But when we talk about building distribution channels and the kind of content that you need to push down those channels, we're not talking about the budget of the Heritage Foundation. We're talking about $1 billion industry that, to create one movie studio for 1 year, and the left has a dozen movie studios every year.
Movies are really inefficient, though. I mean, for my money, it's the daily drip of hourly content by the networks like CBS or NPR. NPR operates on about they do about $600 million in revenue now, and that money comes in. Salem, we do $550 million a year in revenue. This is not some pie-in-the-sky idea. Ed Atzinger, my CEO, started Salem in the year 2000 because he thought Christians didn't have a voice nationally. He didn't think conservatives did, and we're turning a profit. So I think that's the kind of distribution that matters. Movies, I think, have very little impact on the culture today. There aren't that many, and they cost a lot of money to make, and it's an hour and a half of someone's time. I love the stuff that's every day, every hour. That's the stuff that's really impacting the culture.
And movies,
Drew?
well, movies are pretty much over as as the major art form. I mean, it's mostly TV now that people talk about around water coolers, and kids, young people, aren't even watching TV. They're watching YouTube, and they're watching they're sort of force feeding stuff off of Netflix.
But let me challenge that just by, if we accept the premise that television is a more powerful medium, and I think I would agree with that, you still face the same problem. And a season of Breaking Bad does 13 episodes. The budget is $4 million per episode. So you're talking about $50 million to produce that, and then the network that's carrying it is a $500 million a year operation. So the numbers, I mean, the question of how do we're not talking about a donor base that can make this happen, I guess is where I'm going. We're talking about a major corporate undertaking that's going to require incredible capital to create.
But my question is why, I mean, if Murdoch was so successful with Fox News, why aren't there 5 Fox channels that one of them dealing with stories, one of them dealing with the young? Why doesn't that happen? Why are we so dopey about this? I mean, Murdoch, God bless him, can't live forever, and I mean, there's nobody to replace him. There's nobody who's thinking like he is.
We have 14 national brands of potato chips. I'm telling you, this is the Stockholm Syndrome. We actually believe we can't do this and can't afford it. Yet we'll instantly go out to investors with a good book and a deck from Deloitte or somebody and raise $200 million to start X, Y, and Z potato chip company. But we somehow think we're not entitled to run distribution channels and run our own CBSs, when of course we are. Yes, that's one positive example, and there are going to be many more. That's exactly right. Glenn's doing it, and he's leading the way, and more will do it. Now, Glenn's doing pay-per-view, and so his audiences he's trying to get to cable. This is a very interesting thing that he's trying, and I wish him the best, and I think he's going to be able to do it. But that's what we need to be able to do. We need to be able to come to our people with books, investor books, and then now you got to invest in people who have the experience to do it, who've done it before, and that's the problem. We don't have an executive bench that knows how to do this. We only have right now 2 media companies and a fledgling media company just starting. So we don't have the bench. Once we have the bench, if I were to flip up a network and then I trained 2 other guys so they could flip up networks, in 5 to 10 years, we could have, along with Glenn's, 5 or 6 networks. It's just getting the bench. I'm sorry, we're gonna have questions in just a touch.
Yep. And I actually think it'd be appropriate to open up to questions if no one else has anything that they'd like to add first. That's a great question to start with.
Well, I think there is one obstacle, actually. And I think that one obstacle is everybody in the conservative movement likes to say, if I had the option, I would put money into it. The truth is that if there were a conservative entertainment option that were billing itself as such, that's the only thing that conservatives would invest in, and it would be bound to fail. And the reason I say that it would be bound to fail is because the minute that you label entertainment conservative, you've put a target on your back that means that everyone will come and destroy you, and the content that you are making will undoubtedly be expected to be a Reagan biopic every other week. And that is not the stuff that is actually going to draw audiences. I mean, even though Andrew and I argue sort of about kind of the moral underpinning of what exactly these movies are supposed to look like, I think we both agree that if it's overtly political, it's done. Yeah. And the problem is that the first thing we have to overcome in order to get to the point where people are actually going to put money into something like this is that conservatives have to get over what I call the dolphin syndrome, which is they have 2 sides of the dolphins sleep with one half of their brain on and one half of their brain off. Conservatives have 2 sides of their brain, the entertainment side of their brain and the political side of their brain. When the political side of their brain is on, they don't even want to hear about entertainment. And when the entertainment side of their brain is on, they don't want to hear about politics. Until the 2 sides of their brains start to connect and they start to realize that entertainment is politics and politics is entertainment, then the crowd that is going to invest in something that doesn't bill itself openly as conservative media network that makes only Christian movies and Reagan biopics is bound to fail.
Christians actually have to make entertainment that they don't like. I think
that's right.
That's no doubt. And Ben, that just gets back to bad executive talent. I promise you, we could do it.
But Thomas Nelson, I write young adult. Some of the books I write are young adult thrillers for Thomas Nelson. Thomas Nelson started out as a Bible company. It's now a Christian publishing company. They called me. I had given an interview in a Christian magazine. They called me and said, "Would you write for us?" And I said, "Do you know who I am?" And they said, "We do." And I said, "Look, I'm not going to preach to anybody. It's obnoxious and it makes for bad storytelling." And they said, "Just write stories. Write them for young adults so they're not dirty or anything like that, but just write stories." I gave them a best-selling series on that alone. because all I did was change the rules. I just told a great story, and the guy was a Christian. The hero was a Christian. That was the only thing about it. Jesus didn't come and save him. There were no angels. There was nothing supernatural happening. It took place in the world as we know it, and I didn't preach to anybody, and it works, and because they let me do that. And I don't think too many Christian enterprises would have done that.
Was there an altar call on like the back dust jacket cover?
Yeah, exactly. You get a little card.
Yep.
I'm Jerry Hayden, a political activist from Scottsdale, Arizona. There are two types of capitalists in our world that preach communism, and they make lots of money out of what they do, but still preach redistribution, but don't redistribute what they earn. And that would be all of the entertainers. You're talking about the entertainers, movie stars, athletes, who are traditionally preach the communism. We also have a lot of new entrepreneurs, inventors, who make things and make millions of dollars, billions of dollars, but still preach this redistribution, but do not redistribute their own money. A two-part question is, why are they such hypocrites? And two, how can we educate them, or the population, in how critical they are and how we can change their minds?
So this is one of the funniest things about working in Hollywood is talking to guys who say, I'm making a great new movie about a courageous unionizer who organizes a factory, and we're filming it in Budapest so we don't have to pay the Teamsters. And I think the answer to your question is they're so successful, they're so isolated by their money from government craziness and government confiscation that it makes them feel better. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel virtuous to make that movie, even though as they make it, they squeeze every penny out of every worker they can.
And I'd like to just add one point to what Ben was saying about the storytelling. What has to happen is we have to have storytellers who happen to be conservatives and happen to be people who care about faith, and not the other way around. You know, Johnny Cash had a great line. I wrote a really good piece on him for National Review, and I was digging up some research, and he said, here's why I think I'm so successful. I'm a songwriter who happens to be a Christian, not a Christian who happens to be a songwriter. I think that's very important, and I think that's why he drew so many people to his work.
That's great.
I'm Art Saltz from Parrish, Florida, which is a small community north of Sarasota. And some time back, after the last presidential election, we had a victory party, and the community got together. After all, we had chairs, empty chairs out on lawns all over the community, and American flags. And we knew that Obama couldn't win, and we spent an agonizing evening because he outworked us, he outpulled the critical vote, he pulled the conservative vote in critical areas, and that's the story of a victorious evening. Now, how do we prevent having another victorious evening as we've had in the past?
Ron?
I don't know if I can I pass on that
How did
one?
we win in 2016?
Now, this isn't about the inarticulate right.
2016?
The right has been inarticulate since its beginning. But, and we don't know why. I sometimes think maybe the right isn't American born, or there's some reason. But the point is, Obama outworked us and outthought us and outorganized us. And how do we prevent that in the future?
I don't think Obama won because he outworked us. First of all, I mean, he had the social media mastered. Ironic, he had the internet. I mean, he had that guy who bought the New Republic and ruined once a good magazine by turning it far to the left that nobody reads anymore. I mean, he ran the Obama internet and media campaign, got all these kids into the kids who were into social media to use it for the Obama campaign, while Republicans had that system they were waiting to use on election day that crashed, that they never tested. Now we got Obama's healthcare system crashing, and the social media that put him in power suddenly disappeared. We didn't compete in that. Republicans weren't tuned to the use of social media. You had people like Mark Zuckerberg and his team. You can't beat that. To win in 2016, I think what we have to do is bring, my wife and I are working on a book on a great Republican president who nobody remembers, Warren G. Harding. And what he did is he came in, was running for president after the Republican Party had been split into two sides, conservative and TR's so-called progressive Republicans. And what he did after the disastrous statist years of Woodrow Wilson's administration that the country was fed up with, he managed to bring both sides of the party together to stop attacking each other, and won in a landslide. One of the things I think Republicans have to do is end this, what I think is a disastrous split between so-called establishment Republicans and Tea Party conservatives. I think both have to work together, stop attacking each other, build on each other's strengths, and fight the liberals and the statists and the Democrats, not each other. If we don't do that, I don't think we're going to win.
Ben?
You know, I think asking about how we're going to win in 2016 is actually, in some ways, the wrong question. The question is, how do we change the American people and change their minds so that we win continuously? Because one election is not going to do it. This has been a continuous downward march for something like the last 80 years in terms of the growth of government, the last 100 years in terms of the growth of government. That's not going to be reversed in one election. If Mitt Romney actually had one, I'm not firmly convinced we would have seen a massive cut in government spending. I think that we would have seen some cuts in government spending. But let's face it, gang, I mean, we're spending $4 trillion a year. If we go down to $3 trillion, which is a 25% cut, we're still spending $400 billion more than Bill Clinton was spending last year his term. So the goal here is, the first thing to note is, number one, if we're going to win on a continuous basis, the people in this room are not the electorate. Meaning this is the only room in America where you actually got a round of applause for Warren G. Harding. Most people in America don't know who Warren G. Harding is, let alone whether to like him or not. The only way that we're going to continuously win, and this is really what this panel is about, is the culture is really where it's at. You know, Andrew Breitbart always used to say that politics was downstream of culture, and he was exactly right. The fact is, the ground had been prepped for President Obama, the ground was prepped for Bill Clinton, the ground is prepped for Hillary Clinton going into 2016. In order for us to change how the ground is prepped, we have to start reversing the polarity of the morality tale that's being told. Earlier, you know, Andrew, you were talking about kind of Shakespeare plays and saying that they don't exist in kind of the morality play mold, but that's not really true. I mean, they sort of do. The fact is that Edmund doesn't win at the end of Lear. Macbeth does experience guilt. Lady Macbeth does go crazy for no apparent reason.
No, they exist in a moral universe.
Right, they exist in a moral universe. So in the end, while it's not a morality play in the sense that there's someone who's there necessarily punishing them, they live in a universe where God is present.
That is my exact point.
Yeah, exactly. No, so you and I actually agree. So,
we do agree about that.
But
yes.
we need to. But the American people, I'm not sure, do agree about that anymore. Meaning the bad guy is allowed to win now. Yeah. And the bad guy is supposed to win in many cases now. And until we change how the American people think about that, I mean, look at the case of abortion. How is it that the woman, there was last night on MSNBC, there was a really fascinating interview with this woman who wrote a column in New York Magazine about the abortion that she'd had and abortions that other women had had. And she said that abortionists were heroes. And one of the people who was hosted was a woman who had had an abortion, purely elective. It was not for medical reasons. It was not because of rape or incest. She'd had an abortion at 28 weeks. Okay, 28 weeks is, my wife is 30 weeks pregnant right now. 28 weeks is 7 months. Okay, we're talking a fully formed baby that's viable outside the womb. This woman is a hero in the eyes of the left. If you visit the Democratic National Convention, it wasn't that they were cheering the right to choose. They were cheering abortion itself. Abortion is, in many cases, a moral good, according to these folks. So the question becomes, how do you win back? The same thing is true. All the right wing worries about, what do we do on same-sex marriage on a state level? We lost the culture, folks, and that's why we lost the law. Okay, you can't hope to keep the law and then somehow win back the culture. We have to win back the culture first. So if we're going to win back what America should be, we're going to have to convert America back to not only founding ideals, but founding values and a certain set of morals and precepts that go far beyond whoever we nominate in 2016.
And I think that since we got an agreement out of Ben and Andrew, that probably means we're wrapping up. So let's take one more question, and then we want to move everyone over so that you have plenty of time to get to lunch and the panel or the remarks by Ann Coulter.
Okay. You know, you were mentioning that we needed storytellers for different things where you show that, you know, people don't live perfect lives, but they have consequences. I think